Hello, Jim. So this is the 25th of July, 2020, Future of Text discussion on a Monday. Cool. Jim, you can hear me, right?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfectly well.
Good.
And here is Brandel, who's completely given up on sleeping recently. I saw you making comments earlier, Brandel, so you must have been to bed late and up early.
No, that's my usual schedule. Perhaps it shouldn't be, but that's what I do.
So we're back in Tallinn on the way back to London, and it's a little bit loud here by the window. Mark, you're vertical. Let's have a look at your head. Is that from your fall, or is that a new gang tattoo?
No, I basically had something I blacked out, and I measured my length into the side of a table, so I'm a bit crook at the moment. It's my neck actually that's really suffering. All this is cosmetic. It will go away in a week or two, but all part of life's rich pageant,
Yeah, okay. That's something we can try to ignore, but not when you sit like that, Mark. You're literally rubbing it in our faces. Your pain and suffering.
Took me hours to put the makeup on. Yes.
Exactly. Morning, Bob.
Morning.
Morning. So, by the way of, let's see who's coming, anecdote of the day, where we just got back from this wedding. We missed half of it because of my COVID, but when I was COVID free, we drove down, went on the island, very cultural experience and all that stuff. Absolutely wonderful. And I had a few more days down south in Estonia. Now we drove back to Tallinn, where we went to a firing range where I could shoot things. So that was really interesting. There's two reasons we went to that. One is I used to be in the army. I like shooting, even though I'm not exactly a gun nut, and gun rights should be severely restricted, but it's fun. The other thing is I want Edgar to have a clue what it is, because we do have a war in Europe at the moment, plus TV and media and all of these things with guns. So I wanted him to hear they're loud, they're dangerous, they're heavy, be careful. So he has a balanced view of what it is. But in terms of this group, what was interesting is that even though I'm former military, I was in the infantry, and if you give me a good rifle, I can zero it in and hit a cigarette packet at 200 meters, no problem, if I have some time. But I did really poorly today with the handguns. So we talk a lot about interactions, and the simplest interaction in the world must be point and squeeze, right? But of course, there's so much more to it than that. So when people talk about wanting simpler interfaces, I think we can start saying, where in the physical world, what activity has a simple interface that gives you something powerful or useful in return? There's hardly anything. For some reason, computers are expected to do magic. But anytime we want control, we need to be able to tell the system or the tool what we need it to do, right?
Yeah, but I think it's also an interesting thing. When you describe your difficulty you're having, my mind immediately thought back to what's Blazing Saddles and the old joke about no, but this is my shooting hand, when he's trying to explain, he said, hold your hand out, and sorry, put it in front of the gun. One's like this and the other's all like that. So if you're touching something, you're holding something, that any tremor that you have is comparatively minor. If you are pointing at something, even through a device held within the system, of course, the moment of arc at the end of what you're pointing at will be massively altered by the degree of shaking your hand. So what I take from that is you want interactions that are probably direct, where you're using this to the max, but you're not introducing an error because there is a sort of a distance between this movement and the effect, if that makes sense. Brandon will probably be able to explain that far better than me.
It is very interesting. But what he explained to me today, because I used a Glock and then later on something similar to a Desert Eagle, he said the second gun is twice the weight of the first one, so therefore the recoil will be half, roughly speaking. And that was really interesting too, that, you know, it's very easy to artistically talk about the materiality of things. But when you're shooting a bullet at something, if nothing's stopping it, you really get that kick. And I could really feel the difference between the American M4 with 5.56 and then the Polish version of the AK-74 7.62. The American M4 is designed to be carried around. It's really light, but the 74 is designed to be shot from, so it's really heavy. You know, even these basic differences are really fascinating. And I wish Fabienne was here, because going into VR, what kind of physicality do we want to take with us and which ones do we want to get rid of, right?
One unfortunate reality of VR at this point is that the physicality, the tangibility that we enjoy from having the force feedback of weights and sort of inertial things isn't something that anybody seems to have line of sight on. I've been really interested in the idea of making use of things like fans to simulate weights in certain directions, but I haven't seen any serious research that sort of integrates things like that. People have small weights that they can be moved around very quickly within an object, but that's still very much at the, not even really at the chi stage, but at the whist stage of still being understood to be fairly off the wall research. So yeah, it's something that I think about a lot because when people talk about virtual reality, they sort of seem to imply that the visual reality is really all of it. And some people think that sound should be done relatively well. Even Oculus Meta has a pretty solid sound department where they understand things about the way that sound needs to be attenuated based on your head angle and things like that in order to be, because of the way the ears are shaped and the impact that it has on most people. But the reality is so much more complicated than that, because we don't see and we don't hear per se. I would say that a more accurate way of understanding it is that we respond with a unified percept that integrates all of those senses. But there are other senses as well that are responded to in humans, where we have, if you move your hands close to a wall, then you will be able to feel the sort of acoustic impact of having that wall. I like your green screen, Peter.
Thank you.
And yeah.
The green screen showed up.
And yeah, not that we need to worry particularly about animals, but I have cats, and they have such an enormous function for their smell within VR, and it makes me think there will be many things about those minor senses that we're missing as well. And yeah, vision is the easiest for us to be able to kind of spoof with a headset, but heft is a very big one, and the others will also play a part as we manage to make even modest inroads into the other ones as well.
This even goes on basic Mac OS. I remember, I think it was Mac OS 7, where the top bar at the top of the screen, you could move stuff too easily. You know, so I'm thinking here of Bob Horn's murals. Yes, we should be able to move them, but some should be able to be moved less easily than others, right? You said the word heft, which was great to hear. Mark?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yes. And this observation doesn't come from the glass half empty place, but listening to Brandon speaking just now, I was thinking that maybe we actually want to start making the point that now VR is a sort of it's a real enough thing that we're not arguing about if it's here, but to say that it is not actual reality. It is a different environment. So we get benefits like 6 degrees of freedom, but for all the reasons Brandon just mentioned, it is not reality. Because now in an escapist sense, in entertainment, that's fine. If you think you're on a flume ride, well, that whoopie-doo, that's great. That's entertainment. But if you think that if you're doing something and actually it's devoid of numerous bits of feedback that you're used to, generally that smells to me of a problem where only unexpected things occur. I mean, I do wonder the degree to which things like remote surgery use any form of haptic sort of pushback feedback, because if you've got a very sharp knife, you don't just want to plunge it in,
Yeah. So there are phenomenal force feedback systems for things like a single point within 6 degrees of freedom, where it'll be able to differentiate, and so we do that. One of the cool things about that is that we also have the ability to magnify, so that a surgeon can be working on capillaries, but they can be this big, and so that you have the ability to. I mean, I think normal surgeons can sew up a grate, and so I would hope that they can sew up something even smaller.
So I think that's a really interesting observation about magnification. So if I understand you correctly, this means that I can be working at sort of 50 times zoom, but the feedback is sort of not zoomed in the same sense. So it's still pertinent to the task I'm doing. So I may be seeing a bigger picture, but I'm not getting 50 times as much feedback, because that way madness would lie. But again, that sort of subtlety is all too easily overlooked. And I sort of sense that, also because the thing where all the most exciting stuff is happening in the visual reality place is generally about entertainment, and it is exactly the opposite. It is about creating the sort of sensory falsehood that we are somewhere we are not. That it's really worth sort of fighting to have some distinction. So there are points where that is not what you wish to occur. That will not actually help you with some of the things you want to do, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Well, so the force feedback, it becomes an additional tunable dimension, something that can be configured and specified to the desires and to the aptitudes of the user. And I think that's an essential component. There's mandatory participation for the most part of the ways in which aspects of our realities intervene on our unified experience, the way that sound bounces around in a room, the way that light impacts things if you have a lamp on in the corner. Those have been imbued with meaning for us by virtue of the fact that we have a modest degree of control over whether a table is spongy and things like that. What virtual reality, to the extent that we have the ability to produce virtualized senses like that, allows us to do is create fully tunable aspects, sort of axes along which we have the capacity to say, like, how much does this matter? What way in which do we want this to matter? And then turn it on and observe sort of experimentally and cleanly, maybe for the first time, what it is that those things do for us in our unified experience of interacting with some data source or some expression task. And from that point, we can say, well, this is what that sense is for. And I think that's very exciting.
I have books.
Sorry, you had some cool books.
I have 2 new books. Mark, sit down. You can't buy these. It's okay. Found these yesterday, and I think they're really pertinent to us in general and specifically now. So I'll open up. This book is from, this one is not very old. This one is from 1932. But so readable. Beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. This other book is, this one's a bit older. So this book is from 1894. Mm-hmm. And for the benefit of the Americans in the room, how much do you think I paid for these from this age here in Europe? $7 each.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's believable.
The reason I wanted to show them to you is for this kind of discussion. I could imagine having printed books in the future like we do now, they're not going to go away. But when we enjoy the physicality, you know, like the thumb in the middle of the book, all that great stuff, the headset should be able to give us all kinds of cool stuff on top. So, you know, that's a way to retain the physicality of the book, at least, is to still have a book. And of course, we can have a blank book where text is projected, but you know, that's a different thing. But to just have nothing floating in air is not a pleasant way to read, is it? A guy in the library.
Or we could have a book with e-ink on the pages, so the content of the book would be changed dynamically.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love that.
Yes. Yeah, so you basically walk around with a folder. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have these random discussions because we're all about VR, but we're not about VR just replacing the whole world. We have to decide what aspects to keep using. But the other thing that I've been pushing a little bit, and I'd really like to hear what all of you think, and that is, I think it's time we also bring AI into the fold. I think that AI and VR are two massively important tools that in 5 years, we're going to look back and say, why didn't we use this, that, and the other? There are so many amazing writing tools that exist out there. Some of them are doing what we talked about, I think it was last time we were together, where you go to a website and you ask it to continue text, you give it a paragraph, and what could the next sentence be or the next paragraph be? And we've all seen this GPT-3 and all of these good things. But I was just wondering, why can't we as a community start talking about something like in a word processor, of course, in my case, an author. You right away, you hit command question, and it shows you, let's say, 3 panels. One is the suggested next paragraph based on your own writing plus what's in the document, because it has all your own. Second one can just be based on the internet generally. And the third one can be based on a specific corpus of documents. Maybe in our case, it would be the hypertext proceedings. So that's what it generates, the next possible thing. These are eminently doable things now. So I'm hoping Bruce Horn will come and talk to us about some of it. He said he will try to find time. But also, if we have other people that we think should be part of that, that will be really, really cool, especially for the symposium. Peter.
I'd like to see a resurgence of classical symbolic AI. There were a lot of wonderful systems, and basically they exceeded the hardware at the time, so they all got shelved. And now everyone's in the neural processing model, and they forgot about all the older technology, which in today's hardware environment would go a lot further than it did back then.
Peter, could you just expand on what that actually means? I get the neural reference at the moment. I mean, in terms of the older things, was this where it was more about logic trees and things?
Well, in the older systems, they had models and templates for different kinds of stories and situations so that they were able to recognize patterns in the text, then map them to the symbolic representation of the stereotypical scene. So for instance, if you mention, I tip the waitress, that would bring up a memory organization packet related to restaurants and tap into a restaurant script. And from that, the system would be able to infer that you'd ordered food, that you got the food and enjoyed the food, and the whole series of questions that could be answered based upon the stereotypical script for that scenario. And with a large enough number of scripts and fast enough indices, you can start doing very interesting things. Also, they had systems that could recognize news stories and answer questions about them, or generate news stories off of data feeds, things like that. So they're also text generation in the reverse direction, following the patterns and instantiating them.
Yeah, I mean, so that's an impact of it. The way that I would characterize the difference between symbolic and sub-symbolic AI is that those symbols at some level probably exist within sub-symbolic AI, but we haven't explicitly defined them and determined them. What we've done is thrown a massive corpus of data at something and created at most points a fairly solid linear regression model that allows for some dimensions or some combination thereof to encode for the restaurantness or the foodness of a particular term or query. Symbolic AI is where you take the responsibility of determining the representation and the terms that you will use for identifying that. Siri was very much symbolic for many of the years, and Apple has only very recently managed to throw the last of the symbolic AI out. The issue with it is that it is very fast, and people do use it for a lot of things. So machine vision contains large numbers of symbolic sort of components. We do a lot of image-to-image transforms that sort of transpose the representation of a scene into things. So we use a probabilistic Huff transform, which allows us to determine sort of contours and the regions of influence to figure out on cameras that are trained on a road to try to figure out the vanishing point, stuff like that, or whether there are road signs the side of the road. And we have other symbolic components that feed in order to make the sub-symbolic work a little bit easier. The issue with Siri ultimately, when it was primarily or purely symbolic, was that yes, you could get a restaurant thing, yes, you could get, so Siri started with what, movie tickets, weather reports, things like that. The problem was that the representations were, I don't want to say fragile, but they were very opinionated and required a significant human intervention to expand those representations to new turns of phrase or things that were sort of out of set. So they definitely have a role, but they do better in kind environments where the sort of the domain of what it is that you're expecting to see is relatively simplified. So, for example, with the roads and the cars, a symbolic representation of what the ground is and where the center markings are pretty reliable, provided you know where you are in the world and things like that. But if you try to take something trained on English roads to Central Africa, then I imagine pretty much all bets are off. So yeah, we do use it in pieces, but we tend to have components that sort of fit together depending on the robustness of the expectations we have about the domain, is the way I would characterize it.
Mark.
Yeah, so second point, and really following on from Fred's sort of question. Well, you sort of raised AI when we last spoke, and I've been thinking about that a bit. Two things sort of occur to me. One is just the fact that every man and his dog is spending money on AI. So compared to the things we're discussing here in relation to VR, especially VR outside the sort of entertainment aspect of it, there's an awful lot going on. So the question is what part of AI? And I mean, one important bit to me, and I'll see in just a second, is really sort of keeping the human in the loop, because as Brandon's just discussed, at the moment we're heading very much on the other direction, mainly because of our insane desire to have generalized AI, when actually what we're building is much more finely scoped, which is where it does work very well at the moment. So I'm basically making the open question. So apart from the fact that AI does whizzy things, how practically do we connect it up to this?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the thing. I use my Apple Watch a ton now. Emily and I, my wife and I, sometimes that's all we have. And the speech recognition is absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely ridiculous. It even gets local place names right. So it knows a lot of stuff. So I think that illustrates there's a lot of AI/ML that exists that we can plug into systems. And I feel that we're kind of ignoring them, because AI goes from, oh my God, will it work in an area, to, oh, that's a bit boring, it just works now. It's such a flip. So I think that obviously we have talked about having, and Noda that you use, Mark, of course you can speak labels for things. So I'm thinking about that kind of too. I'm not just thinking about AI for analysis, which is of course another thing. And then you have the question of, is it AI for small amounts of text or for huge volumes of text? Also, Is it AI for text that is in a linear kind of a page, or is it AI for text that's on a mural or in another layout? These are different kind of AIs for different kinds of analysis. I mean, a lot of the analysis I'm very wary of, and I want to keep it almost on the text-to-speech level, because Edgar today asked in the car, what's the difference between a rocket and a missile? There are actually hugely interesting differences, but the main thing is, and it kind of goes into this, in civilian life, there's only rockets. There are no missiles. Missiles is a military thing. It's a guided rocket, right? So that's kind of cool. But then if you look at physics, what is a missile? Anything that is projected by force. So it could even be a pebble that someone flicks. That's a missile, right? I know that human language is very varied, but that's where knowledge graphs and all that immediately starts to scare me. If, as you say, Mark, it takes the human out of the loop. But I think there are so many more lower level things we can really use. And when we are in a VR environment, we keep talking about what are we going to put on the walls. I think we can start plastering AI-derived things on the walls, because we have the space, and then after a while see what actually fits. You know, what is just junk? What is a good analysis? What's an interesting analysis? And we have a new guest here today. Would you like to introduce yourself? I'm so glad we finally managed to catch up after a few Twitter discussions. And yes, no, you're still muted actually. Oh, there we are. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Nice to meet you guys. 1 second. Give me just 1 second.
See, that's all about the physical.
Thanks.
There,
At this point, yeah, like seems very interesting. And my background is primarily in product design. I'm interested in using tools for thought to like go from this nebulized idea of a space where we can connect ideas, which I guess there's fair agreement on, to something that we can concretely implement. I played around with a couple of the tools which are available on Windows, and I'm always on the lookout for more, of course. And glad to be here, glad to be part of this.
Yeah, good to have you. We've had a discussion on connecting information, and today is more general, but I'm wondering, what is the appetite for the group? Do you want to go back to the connecting discussion, or should we be general, or is there a different topic? We kind of dove in head first, and I want to make sure we're all swimming in the right stream. Bunch of fish.
But Bob turned his camera on. I wonder if that meant that he had a contribution to make.
Oh, it meant that breakfast was over, and and yes, I was expecting connecting, us to introduce connection, because I'm only going to be here for another 45 minutes, 45 minutes, reflecting on our past conversation, which I found very interesting. I think that one of the things that would be helpful for us would be to be able to distinguish broad classes of text when we're discussing things. In other words, it seems that one can do that from different standpoints, but I'd like the group's help just to even brainstorm it a little bit. For example, there is the traditional essays that we're all taught in English class to write, which are not very useful, which only have limited use, let's put it that way, in business, where quick memos with short points without a lot of extra literary devices and and metaphors and all that sort of thing are important. So those are two broad classes of things that we do. A third kind, which of course I worked on a lot, is in the procedures, policies, documentation area, which is quite different. I used to say that my company existed because English professors could not teach how to write technical manuals and procedures and policies. that's how we made our money, because they failed. So there are classes of these, and I was, really struck. I hadn't realized the function in author Rhoda that you demonstrated last, and I've been thinking about it, every so often during the weekend. That is the ability to cover, to identify a portion of a sentence or a whole sentence with, I think you did it with boldface, but which then with some sort of a click of some at some place, which I don't know what it is, but I assume it would be very simple. It would reduce the whole essay type writing to summary, because summaries are very helpful. If the summary isn't 3 pages long and no paragraphs and no subheads within it, but it struck me as something being very, very helpful that I didn't know existed in author, and it's inclined, given that sometimes I write essay-like things, not very often these days. I mostly just write memos to the people I'm working with. But if I do, I would tend to maybe learn author. But the point I'm making is that there are different classes of text, and of course, obviously on the murals, they're little chunks. They're 5 to 1 to 7 sentences long, which I as I'm analyzing, I'm building, and I know I'm going to be making murals. I'm building those one at a time and putting them usually someplace on an Illustrator, big Illustrator board or document. So then I can move them around. So that's at least one thing that that would help me at least understand what an individual here is talking, what kind of a context and what kind of a text people are talking about when, and do we want to go in more deeply to one or another of these, which might seem more promising than others in virtual reality to begin with. In other words, are you thinking about writing essays in virtual reality? You're thinking about writing murals, and I know a couple of you have thought about that, or about something else. Memos. Are you doing your memos to your groups in virtual reality? What kind of work are we gonna intellectual? And I understand intellectual work, but all of these are different kinds of intellectual work that result in different kinds of text. So it would be helpful for me, at least, to for us, if there's any progress we can be making today or in the future about that.
That's really very clear set of questions you had there, and I think I speak for all of us when I say there's a difference between what we would like to design for and what we kind of have to design for. For instance, in academia, you still have to hand in a PDF, right? Which is just reality. I'm not saying that's what we want to design for. I think it'd be much more useful to, okay, when I first met Mark Anderson and also our other friend Chris Guttridge at Southampton, the first thing that snapped into my brain that I hadn't realized was that in our community here, we talk about hypertext and connections and connected knowledge. That's great. But academia is a series of assertions that are backed up. So if you're going to make an academic argument, you have to linearize it. You have to say, this is this because of that, something similar to that. You can't just put a lot of knowledge with arrows going around, because that is not a resolved statement. That doesn't have a position in it. So that became a really interesting thing to look at for quite a while. And if in a community, we could look at how to bridge that. One of the main designs of author is that you can live with this knowledge space, try to linearize it, but then your reader can unlinearize it and see the connections again. So you asked about the size of text, which is then absolutely crucial. There should be no reason why you can't do a mural and an essay. But of course, as Mark has said so many times, we tend to write today not knowing how it will be read. It would be great if we can help the reader saying, we actually expect this to be read in a certain way, which is why we have laid it out. And of course, we have to redefine what we mean by laying out. You know, it's not just on an A4 sheet. There are so many other aspects of what a layout can be. So I just want to thank you for that. By the way, do you want to briefly see that thing? Okay, fine, since you insist, here it is. So what it is you, as you write your own stuff, you highlight what you think represents that section. And when you then do, so that's just select text and Command Shift H. And then you can do Command minus to go into outline. Boom. So that's all it is. Just manually, these are the bits that I feel talk about these different sections. Many of them don't need it. And now I will remove that.
Well, you go, you know, one of the things that people do, you included, is click through something so fast, a text so fast on the internet, I cannot at least digest it. I can't even read it because you're running up and down the text so fast.
I'm sorry, I just didn't want to spend. Okay, I'm very happy.
All right, well, I can.
So
you know, maybe I'm taking up other people's time. I don't wish to do that, and you know, if others don't, are not interested in that, then
no,
fine.
I think this is really interesting, and it makes me want to also contrast this approach to telescoping text to something like Omni Outliner, if anybody's familiar with that. It's an explicit outline where you have heads and subheads, and all of the heads are collapsible individually, such that you can have an arbitrary configuration of the tree with any number of the children expanded or collapsed. And I think that that's a distinct, an interesting but distinct sort of approach to this, because it means that a lot of the opinionation one would have about the structure of that happens sort of ahead of time is something where you have that collapsibility and be on it after the fact. And I think that those are two very different and really interesting approaches to the way that you can create that level of detail.
Yes, I was of course,
if you want to,
I was taught, as maybe some of you were taught, always to outline what I was going to. It struck me when I was in my late 20s that it was just striking that we eliminated most of the outline, which was in fact showing you what the structure of the document was. If the structure, I'm always looking for the structure of the document, both the content structure, that is subject matter, but also how it is arranged in text. And I think that's one of the really missing things in our whole system right now.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many structures of a document.
I agree. I think the outline is, in many cases,
I'm getting breakup of okay.
I have Rhoda stuck on a freeze frame as well. I imagine Estonia. No, I mean, Estonia is supposed to be the cyber country, isn't it? You can get digital citizenship and things.
Well, Rhoda is gone.
Whilst we're waiting for Fredo to sink back in, I was thinking about Bob's comment about the outline and things, and I can quickly sort of share a screen that in a sense offers the alternate model, because this is just for one tool. This is the thing I've been writing now for since 2004 about a tool called Tinbox, but it's currently over 2,500 pre-static HTML nodes, you might say, but it comes from about 8,000 items in the background file to it, and some things just don't want to be linearized. And one of the things I found myself reflecting on in a real world sense is this problem. Sometimes actually how do you write when you're not trying to create an outline, and indeed creating an outline is not actually helping, it's not actually helping the reader. So one of the problems in that problem space is that the reader is wanted to be informed about something in a scenario where there are many different moving parts. How they'll understand the problem space will partly be informed by the vernacular they're used to or the domain they come from. And it's the one thing where actually an outline gives you no traction at all, unless you write for that one person only, which of course a web resource can't really do, because it's trying to write for all sorts of people. I don't claim to have an answer there, but
if I can just interrupt there, I think you can, the best I'll say the best we can do is at least provide the structure that not hiding the structure. And if you provide the structure, at least then the person you're offering the different kinds of readers the chance to scan around and see what part of the structure they want to read, and also that there's a structure there. But if it's one long paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, you know where I'm going with that. You can't see the structure, and I get angry at the New York Times, which I read on paper in the library here, and they have had whole pages, 6 or 7 columns without a subhead in the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I can accord with that. I've just had my sort of third, sort of rage quit from reading a book that is really an interesting essay expanded to book length by mainly having lots of parenthetical phrases and adjective lists, which is a problem in the humanities. But one of the things I take away from the sort of the problem that I just showed is that actually having better ways to expose the intent of one's linkage. So why am I leading you from this place to that place? Or why might you want to expand this part of my sort of say collapsed trail? So in a way, it takes me right back to the notion of trails and side trails and things. But one of the things we never really developed were tools that gave us the affordances both to write and to interact with that, in the sense of, oh, I've got to this point. Actually, I want to go off on this side thing here, because what I realize I need to understand more about this underpinning topic or this underpinning concept. Or I might need to step out completely to understand it and come back, but I want to come back to this point. So what that says to me, that not all links, not all movements within the thing that I'm producing, or say the arrows on one of your murals, they don't all have the same weight or the same relevance.
That's right.
And even from reading to reading, because if I come back later and I'm now informed on the subject that I didn't know about before, I may actually interact with, whether it's say a static mural or a static web page, as the resource I just shown you. Yes, I may traverse in a different way. So what I take from that, and what I sort of keep looking at, is ways in which we signal to our potential reader, whose sort of perspective we can't guess. We can make some educated guesses, but we don't know, put it like that, as to how they might want to go forward, or how they might want to traverse this information space. And even sort of trying to classify the links in a way is fraught in itself, because there's the what and there's the why. You know, where does this take me? What does it take me to, and why should I bother to go there? And they're actually separate things, you know. So they don't. What that means is they don't render down into, oh well, just stick a word on it, and this thing is now typed and works. I don't believe that for a moment. I keep reading things that say that, but I think it's bollocks.
I just realized, Mark, as you were suggesting that on the mural we've looked at, having to do with nuclear waste, that some of the chunks are very linear. They go across from left to right, having to do with the science about the waste or the amount of waste or whatever. However, it would be on a dynamic version of it, one could have different links that would not have to show all, you know, what you showed us were all the links you got in there, which is of course just confusing people, probably even you. But to be able to have filters or distinct kinds of web of that would be really potentially useful and would make it possible to have much more embed much more complexity into a mural without showing it all the time.
Yeah, you're right. And even with a good tool, though, I think it's at this stage a deliberate, a very non-trivial task for the author.
Yes,
because
right.
You've actually got to have in the way that we used to learn to write an outline, you've actually got to understand what you were talking about in a very disconnected, almost hypertextual sense. Yeah. And see the relations between them in order to understand them enough that you can then communicate them understandably to another person. So it ramps the writing. This is my takeaway from the experience. It ramps the writing problem up massively. Doesn't mean it's insurmountable, and that, you know, better tools and better techniques won't get us there. But it's certainly an unexplored aspect. And as going back to what kicked me off on this, when Bob was saying, well, you know, couldn't something like the mural actually be read in a different way? And we sort of have the pieces of all of this. The bit that I think has been left to go, left in the long grass for a rather long time is actually thinking about how we deliver on this this sort of reading experience. Partly because I think we focus far too much on the experience and not understanding the information, the actual structural parts, the affordances that need to be given to people in order to be able to do those traversals. Fred.
I got 3 hands up now. Excellent. Okay. So Brandel used the point, he said decent frame rate, and that is funny because as we were driving, and I'm not changing the subject, this is on exactly what you guys were talking about. You know, I have this new camera I showed you guys off in 47 megapixels, woohoo, it's all wonderful. And then I was just wondering, what is a camera nowadays? You know, we use our smartphones to send instant things. We have this as a camera, we have the other thing. And I was thinking about the Tesla. The frame rate for a Tesla camera, I think is 1,200 frames a second, something like that. Because that's what it needs to keep up when you're driving at 200 miles an hour. Not that I've ever done that, would never happen, right? So what is actually in an image? You have the resolution that is spatial, you know, as in 2D pixels. You have the temporal resolution, which is the frame rates. But then you also have the structural resolution. So for instance, for an EV, electric vehicle doing self-driving, it needs to build a space. What is the resolution of that space? Right, and the work we're looking at here, another question becomes, what is the connective resolution? You know, how much does the document refer to itself and why? How much does it refer to other sources? And how much is it referred to? I think this is getting closer to looking at these aspects to address what you're talking about, Bob. You know, what are the bits that are in a mural? What are the bits that are in a book? And what's appropriate? What are the dimensions to divvy them up?
Yeah, I was explaining to my mother-in-law who's staying with us for the moment what semantical is. It's a word game, sort of like Wordle, but it's based on measuring the semantic distance from things. You get a much larger number of guesses, and so it's more fun and forgiving. And so I had to explain what word2vec is. That concept of being able to code a number of words in dimensional space, and then being able to determine this effect semantic distance to all of those words. And she said, "Oh, that sounds like it would be really useful, like something that would be really good for being able to in reality." And I said, "Well, not really, because the dimensional space that's encoded within word2vec is many, many degrees. It's hundreds of dimensional space, and virtual reality really only gives you one. And that's something that's really important in terms of any high dimensional or complex kind of set of relationships, is that we have, yes, we have another degree of freedom. We have maybe a couple more if we want to imbue things with colors for those of us who have color differentiation of whatever kind. But the reality is that a lot of the relationships that we want to see within a hypertext certainly are often many degrees higher than anything that can be kind of canonically represented in 3 space. And so we need to come up with view specs, sort of representational flexibility that can still be reduced, and having the scale and having the dimensionality of space makes the job of coming up with an appropriate reduction slightly easier, but it's still a significant task. And I think that's funny, but sad, because one sort of naively thinks that at the outset of being able to look at things in 3 dimensions, that's as many as anyone could ever possibly need, sort of in part, I guess, because that's what we tend to live in our everyday life. But the reality is that once you can encode dimensions higher than the 3 that we live with for the most part, it actually turns out that that's useful, and our sensory apparatus are inadequate to the task.
I think that drives us right back to this, because of course, on one hand, the system will do this encoding for us. On the other side of the spectrum, we do it ourselves. So, Bob, this is partly for you, but also what this is, of course, is an author saying this bit matters, everything else has to be there. So I'm just going to do the 2 keyboard shortcuts, Bob, so we're done with this. Command Shift H for for highlights. Command Shift H. Now it's white. And then to see to fold the whole document into an outline is just Command minus. That's it.
Oh yeah.
But what I would like to do is for this to be encoded in Visual Meta. So when this is exported, of course, this won't be visible. But if a reader wants to access my editorial view of the document, they should be able to do that. You know, there's nothing wrong with making people do work if they want to do work to better express themselves. Yeah, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead. First of all, please tell me how to pronounce your name. It's a challenge. I also have a different.
Hi, my name is Anirudh. I'm from India.
You say that's too fast. I could not possibly understand it.
Anirudh.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is this space better? I have a tendency to speak too fast, so please do let me know if I'm going too quickly. So the point I wanted to make was specifically tying back to what we were earlier talking about, like the number of dimensions associated with that we want to encode for information. And essentially so tying that back down to the challenge of like the different styles of writing, right? Like whether you're writing an essay versus writing academic paper or a memo. So the structure or the outline that currently is available in something like Author is only partway to the solution, because even though it provides a specific kind of linearity through over a longer piece or even connecting many different ideas, we're not looking at connections in the space of a paragraph or the space of a couple of arguments, but rather over a longer course of text, right? Like, and these arguments would be connected in different ways. For example, if in the document that you were sharing, so the structure of the document follows like acknowledgements and stuff like that, versus if I was, say, reading the article for the sake of compiling a bunch of ideas about tools for thought, the article, the headings that I would want to see are pretty different from the kind of like rigid academic structure that the author is expected to follow. So that complexity is essentially what I feel that like we should be trying to make at least possible for the user to access, because that's really not something that a reader can do at the moment. It's you deal, obviously it would be useful for me as a reader to see the editor mode that the writer was using, but to take that a step further, what I would really like to do is to be able to play with the mode itself, right? Like to be able to control the headings and subheadings at that level, because as the reader, my needs are particularly different from what the initial writer was expecting. I'm having a little network issue, so I'll just like mute myself now. But if you have any questions or thoughts, of course.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that is a very good question, and I have tons of opinions, so please, someone else speak.
Well, I think that's one of the critical issues with hypertext is that the path, a given experience of a person through that is linear. And the ideal sort of case is that the author has a vision of what the ideal path through it is, but they may be wrong. And they frequently are, depending on the sort of potential mismatch of the context that they're imagining versus the way that somebody is consuming something versus what somebody is actually doing with it. Just as you were talking about that, and it occurred to me how funny the acknowledgements being up top and sort of nominally, like ostensibly having a pride of position within a book, because the acknowledgements are utterly irrelevant for a reader who isn't familiar with the text. It's really a political move on the part of the person writing the book to say that the people have pride of place, but really the significance, the meaning of those acknowledgements are zero until I've read the book, and probably still fairly minor, but until I've read the book and several others, and the sort of the broader universe of what it is that this author is intending to produce. And so it's intensely political insofar as it's there because people who are acknowledged want to be able to flip the book open to the acknowledgements page and see their name there and glow about it. But yeah, that mismatch, I think, is at the heart of a lot of those, is that we don't have ways of anticipating that people will want to be reading differently to the way we want to be producing.
Wouldn't a kind of natural solution to that problem be to I'm sorry, I think he's
Crack on.
okay.
I think he's got a
so yeah, in basically, like, wouldn't a kind of natural solution to the problem that you were talking about be to give the reader some amount of control over the view itself, so that they're able to edit the kind of stuff, like the kind of not necessarily headings. So I'm thinking of somewhere between a cross between the authorial mode writer view that Flore showed versus the kind of like reader completely nonlinear mode. Obviously, you don't want to lose all sense of structure altogether, but giving the reader, in some sense, the ability to slide across those kinds of modes, right? Like when they're taking in information from one or even more than one document at the same time. That's certainly something that seems like a natural fit, but obviously how that would be done seems obviously a little non-obvious.
Okay. Whoops, hang on. I just have to try something with you guys based on this. In author, we have plenty of views. that we're experimenting with. One of them is to see all the defined concepts in the document. Plus headings, always plus headings, right? And I thought this would be really powerful, but it's actually not that useful, right? It's just the text. So what I'm wondering is, when you define something, should we have a little pill, kind of a color thing, so that I'm just mocking it up in Photoshop for you now, where you assign person, technology, whatever it is, you decide. But you decide a category, but you have to give it a color. Usually I'm not a big color person, but if you imagine this view, okay, now it's showing names automatically. That's why it was analyzing it. So these are only names of people, much more useful. But if we do this one, would it be more useful if it had color coding?
In the original, in the full text document, or in the color outline that you were just showing us? What's the question?
Thank you for the clarification there. It would be in that view, not in the normal text version. So when you choose to see only headings plus defined concepts, then
You're breaking up on my end. You're breaking up on my end. Rhoda,
I'll. Is it,
I would get only every third or fourth word.
To quickly interject, the bit I did get in between the dropouts, because I'm getting the same, but I think Freddie did confirm that, is that his idea is that this coloration, for sake of argument, would be in the collapsed version, not in the full text. So you wouldn't have a riot of color across the whole rendered text. But when you collapse, basically it would be an extra visual affordance in the collapsed view.
Well, to that, I would say that I think both would actually be helpful. Having the ability to encapsulate, I guess, the specific terms and be able to identify them in situ. Yeah, I have it configurable. It's a definitely thing, but its utility depends on the extent to which it scales. Annie Root's gone anyway. And it's back to that dimensionality that I was talking about before. The reality is that we have a limited sensorial capacity to be able to parse things in a certain way. And so encapsulating terms scales to a certain point, and it takes us to a certain point, allows us to do those things. But it's still pretty straightforward to have a representation, or have a corpus that abuses that, or results in the utility of that being lost, like you say, in that sea of color. And that's all at cross purposes to having the priority of a single canonical view. And when I used to work on Apple.com, just the fights that we would have over the ragging, where the line breaks were, and the fact that we weren't supposed to do that because we were one of 93 locales, and the reality is that people can actually resize their windows was generally lost on folks. And so that their desire for that canonical representation, I get it, in a printed book, having good ragging is absolutely essential for the quality of reading, and it can land in some very, very strange places. That's before you start to end up with actual truncation occurring on people's links, and people have all sorts of hilarious screenshots of in sort of indiscreet truncation of news articles and things like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think it's very valuable. I think that it's one tool among many, and with any of those things, it's kind of the equation of a Swiss Army knife. What is the added benefit of putting this additional sort of tool in your toolbox versus the added overall complexity of the weight of the toolbox, or the heft of the Swiss Army knife as a consequence of adding it? And on balance, I think that it could easily work. I like those capsules. They serve really positive roles for me. I would say both, though. I would say that I would like to see them in situ as well as potentially reduced. Being able to recognize them in both contexts.
I was going to say that I think it's sadly this is something that needs actually researching. So one of the easily glossed over problems in allowing people to add these extra visual glosses is their ability to do so consistently. I mean, if any of us, if we think about what we've done ourselves, where we attempted to sort of terms across something, and normally if it's a project of any size, you begin to realize as you get towards the end that your perception of what these words or these colors or whatever encoding you were using have drifted somewhat from where you started, and then it becomes a sort of iterative loop. But there is a reality nestled in there that we have to address, which is that if we want to use these sort of things, then we need to make them easy to use, as the brand already says, scale, because what works on one small thing may look horrendous. It may just be too much scale. And I think about how we train ourselves to use these, because I don't think this is something for which the majority, if even a few of us, are at all well figured as we come to the start line of using such things. And I just have one further comment, just get back to something Anna was mentioning in terms of constructing the document, and which brought me back to the fact of so often we talk about trails in a review perspective. Most people talk about them as a manifestation of where somebody went. This is what I did. You can see, you can walk in my steps. I would say more interesting is to view it from the other way around, from the authorial perspective. What are the routes that somebody might take? Whether I tread them or not is another here nor there. They exist. If they exist, why do they exist? For what purpose have I created this connection for them? Assuming it's not one that's generated on the fly. Because if I have, I need to ensure that there's some sensible reason to understand, going back to the what, where, and why kind of thing. So again, it's something that I'm not sure now I think about it, that people have really pushed through a lot, and this is under research. But it's writing for not so much non-linear reading, but a different linear reading of the same body of text. And I think that's what Heinrich was hinting at when he was saying, well, look, I want to be able to deconstruct and go a different way through. And I think it makes absolute sense.
The overall structure, for example, of the the one we've looked at in this group, the nuclear waste one, which is the history, the current decision-making environment, and the future. It's linear, it's time linear. Importance has to do with, to a considerable extent, size, so that the size of the big purple arrows are saying this mural is about these big things, which is the organization and its plans. To a lesser extent are all the contextual elements in below, and so on. And I'm realizing when you're talking about the scale, I've never really tried. I'm going to go back and look at, I did it all intuitively, and so I couldn't. So if you ask me what are the different levels of scale there, well, I'd have to go look at the mural and see what I did. But even though I know I did it.
A really important thing, because I know your observation about in terms of what you're doing, a really important bit in that reading experience for the reader is that you have the whole corpus in front of you. It's the map. It's there whether you want it or not. So it's far less easy to get lost than it is if I was to be looking at that presented one box at a time. If I could only ever look at one box on the map or on your mural at a time, this is the disconnected reality that I was alluding to. Another point.
Well, and it would be equally disconcerting if you had all the boxes on the map, all 400 of them, in linear text form.
Yeah.
Right, even with some side pads.
But deconstructing your,
Yeah.
you know, when I tried to make the JSON data out of your thing, that was actually really interesting because what I found myself
Yeah.
doing, in fact, it won't surprise you, I made a Tinderbox document to capture the information. But one of the things I was trying to do is say, okay, there are strands, there are some strands. You did have a particular set of arrows that were linking across different, you had your horizontal bands, which were listed in the side and were there for the, if you care to look in the document. Some were more obvious than others, and some things I suspect just due to the problem of two-dimensional placement that probably edged up when, you know, out of box. But then again, it's sort of someone who's used to reading those sort of graphics, I think can parse that sort of thing out. But that kind of thing, yeah, is much easier to do when you're presented with the whole thing, and that's in no way a negative observation.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important thing. Peter, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that this discussion reminds me of how a number of textbooks start off in the preface area describing alternate paths through the text, and they'll have scenarios where, depending upon your background, you might want to read this set of chapters. You can skip these 2 chapters, come back in, or you might start on chapter 8 first and then come back. So they suggest alternate reading orders based upon the background of the person reading the text. And there's some very interesting examples of that. It seems like a very useful affordance.
Yes.
Talked about a million times at Southampton, and it kind of
Say some words, Mark.
Oh. Am I that bad? Oh,
Breaking up again. We lost Rhoda again.
Mhm. Yes, and when you were showing us a book or something, Mark, it was hard to see because you didn't say anything. You were muted, so it was hard to read. You didn't come up in the full screen,
Right.
at least my full screen.
I was speaking, but into a microphone that was turned off. The book, which I think most here will know of if they have hard to get hold of, but Ted Nelson's Literary Machines. This is a 1987 copy with the sort of more than the first 3 chapters, but I'm sure it's in here. I can't remember exactly where it is, but his instructions on reading the book, which are an insane take on what Peter's just mentioned, because it subverts all the sense of saying you could do this or you could do that. So, well, start wherever you like. And in fact, there are 2 chapter zeros, and so he's just teasing us. But it speaks to this problem about trying to offer these alternates and for it to make sense and be consumable.
I deliberately have written my 2 books, Mapping Hypertext and Visual Language, with the intent of the reader to be able to scan and skip however they want to in the topics by putting headings, major headings on the top of every double page spread, and linkages within the pages, so that one can literally read across the top by flipping the pages. That was an intent. That was an intentional experiment to see whether one could design a book that someone could skip. You could, for now, it would be relevant to skip most of the first chapter, which is all about what hypertext was in 1987. Not particularly useful, but you could tell that from just reading the top headings. You would not have to go through all the, if it were just in text form, go through all the text. That was the intent, and that was the intent of the experiment anyway. And I at least some people have liked it. That.
New Media Reader also had some very interesting links and affordances in the margin with marks and jump points and all. at the edge of the pages.
What is that? Which one, Peter?
The new media reader. There it is.
New,
Mark
I
has
don't
it up
know it.
now.
New media reader. I don't know that.
Unmute, Mark, so it'll blow up your screen.
Mark is still muted if he thought that he was expanding the screen with his voice.
I think, is Mark still talking?
Yeah,
And he's got his mute on.
He's
Sorry, there was some dogs barking outside. So, Bob, I will put some info in the chat now. Or would you prefer it if I emailed it to you?
Oh, I prefer email.
Thought so. I'll put it in both, but I'll send an email.
Thank you. And if you can scan a page of that, of the new media reader, if it's relevant, you think to me, I'd be interested.
Mark, maybe you could just hold the book up and open it so that you can see what the pages look like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure.
Keep
So,
talking.
On the spine, you can probably just see some darkness. So that's a classic old sort of side index tab, but it's quite useful because there are effectively, you might say, literary as in printed hyperlinks in there, because it will refer you to another article, say on page 206, and human brain being what it is, you can pretty much guess where to start sticking your finger in to scan to it. But basically, the book is a series of reprints of articles relating to mainly sort of hypertext. That you may recognize the picture on the front here. That was from the Time reprint of As We May Think, where they added some illustrations to it. This was talking about the memex. So this is the guy, I think, photographing the things he's reading to put in his memex. And there are bits from other similar works, like, there's a bit of computer lib in there, and there's one or two other things. And I found, I'll find the text. I found Ted's instructions for reading literary machines. But, there is a chapter 0, several chapters 1, chapter 2, and several chapters 3. In other words, and I absolutely take your point. I mean, I put a note in the sidebar, Bob, about the fact that I think we're so habituated to linear reading and sort of structured things that when you offer someone the opportunity to do things, they both do that, but there is a sense of, what am I missing out, or what haven't I covered? You have to be, I think, quite sort of self-disciplined or self-opinionated, think, I'm going to look at this book and I'm only going to read this page because this is all that matters to me. Because all too often you're thinking, well, unless it's something like an encyclopedia. So, or if you go to a dictionary, you look up the word you want to look up. You don't have to read about all the other words. There are other words in there, but they're not what you're looking for at the moment. But yet some people read dictionaries because they like serendipitous discovery. And I think that's a useful analogy.
No, it's
which doesn't in any way, shape or form argue against what you were doing, because I'd absolutely agree. Structuring things in such a way that you're not required to read the book or the artifact once, or at least once in a linear form, but rather you can bounce around. What I think that imposes on the author, and I'm struggling to, in my mind's eye, remember your books, the bits I've read, kind of thing. But what it places on the author is the need to do cross-referencing.
Yes.
Which, in fairness, this book does a fair amount.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the most interesting artifacts on that is this, which is Hypertext Hands-On, which is actually, it was written in Hypertise by, it was done in Hypertise, it was done in Intermedia and one other thing. And it came out in Mac PC and I think Unix versions. Mine has the 5¼ inch floppies, which I had to get a specialist person to get the software off for me. But basically it's the book and the hypertext of the book. And in the book, you may just be able to see there are basically bits that are bolded or sort of square brackets. Yeah. Hyperlinks. So this is somebody in 1987 odd grappling with, you know, as you would have had to when you were making books there, with the fact that we didn't have, you know, decades of experience of things like the web and what hypertext is and what, you know, how links work. We were used to print conventions saying, you know, see page 46 or whatever. So again, another interesting bit of ephemera.
Well, but what I'm, you know, the point that I find, the experience that I've had, and then the point that I make is that it's absolutely essential in the modern world with so much text, with, you know, that we have to be able to skip and scan. Otherwise, we can't get along. We, you know, there's just too much, and so we have to be able to write in such a way that people will not read much of what we write. So, although some people will read all of it, because they have the personalities that compel them to read everything once they have started it. But it isn't the way to survive in the modern textual or information environment. You have to be able to get around in it. Sorry, and I have to leave at this point. Sorry. Good conversation today. Thanks, you all.
I'll email the thing to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
But
James, is your hand up to block the light? Or you've got your hand up to talk? Sorry.
could I pick up on Bob's point to reinforce it? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
In Strayhorn here in California. Mark mentioned the need for cross references. It seems to me, as valuable as that is, it's also cart before horse. Bob is talking about scan and skip, which I think is absolutely critical. And what comes to mind is, imagine going to a new foreign country, renting a car and driving without maps, a road map, or any road signs. That's exactly what most books do. So Bob is talking about giving books road signs and road maps. I just got yesterday a book I've been waiting for several weeks by the man I think is the most relevant economist in the nation or world today. The damn thing is 170,000 words, and I want to find out his main content. So what I'm really curious about is not having, as Anirudh said, I'm not having reader. So being able to scan and skip, to use Bob's term, is absolutely important. And it seems to me what is missing in most books is a visually apparent content. The subtitles that are missing in so many books are a way to scan and skip. Enough said, but I just think that Bob's example, Mark, you were about to put up the title of map, or the cover of Mapping Hypertext. I think that is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got his other book somewhere here, but it's in one of my massive book piles down there. There'll be a loud crash if I try and get it out.
I could access it if I were home, but I can't because I'm not.
Can you guys hear me now?
About to order. Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to shout my agreement. And I also wanted to say that I've uploaded 2 images for you guys. Choose.
All of your pills.
Yeah. And
Yeah, they make a lot of sense.
so thank you. The idea is that for most people, these categories will be wrong. So they have to be able to set their own categories. But once you get beyond 5 to 10 colors, the human eye can't really usefully distinguish them unless they're next to each other anyway. So the expectation is this would be highly personal. But to chime in with what Jim was saying, this is yet another dimension where the reader should be able to navigate the documents. It could be by the highlighted bits, which are essentially subtitled. It should be by the glossary terms, which are connected. My advisor, Les Carr, who Mark also knows well, one of the things he likes as an academic teacher, he wants to read the reference section first, because that tells him a lot about what the document is. So the reference section should be a first class object, just like the rest of the documents. So Jim, you're so completely on the ball with what we're talking about here, because the reader should be able to choose the path and the author should be able to assist with that path, but not dictate it.
Agreed. Assist with the path is a key word.
If you guys have specific thoughts for categories, I just did what was on the top of my little head. Please do tell, by the way. I'm going to see if I can prototype this.
At my wife's recommendation, I started with the last chapter first of Fisher, A History of Text, and that was fun both for the reason of doing what we're talking about here, but also because he talks a lot about diglossia there and the process whereby a written language diverges, or rather the spoken language will inevitably diverge from the its written variant or counterpart. And there are various attempts to pull it back in line to be able to sort of implement a spelling reform or something to do with the orthography of the way that it's written in order to make sure that it sort of reflects what it is that people do. But there's inevitably and invariably a lot of stuff that's lost about the etymology of words, about the functional kind of use of it. Often things like conjugates end up being munged as a consequence of the specific things that people have spoken. And it feels like there's a very strong parallel with what Mark was saying about the sort of semantic drift that we experienced at from the beginning of tagging to the end. The idea that the sort of the markers that we would typically identify something with through the course of using specific keywords to highlight things. And I think that's one of the challenges of a text, is that it's different things to people at different times, in no small part because our understanding is pretty messy and fluid. And so the map that you make at the beginning is different in terms of its sort of key features and landmarks to the ones that you make at the end. And so speed is a factor, if nothing else. Like being able to kind of create a map very quickly means that it can represent a snapshot of somebody's specific understanding. And even if it's imperfect, it might actually be better than if it's, if somebody's understanding is refined over time, because it at least represents a single coherent kind of mode of thinking about a given text. Yeah, I find the sort of the view that we have of a text to be a challenging one to be able to kind of recognize landmarks, because a map is like a literal geospatial map is one that we have relatively decent understanding of, being able to look at it from different altitudes, and we don't have that for a book. We don't have those unless we do that sort of highlighting of specific paragraphs and things. But maybe in part because we just have so much less experience with texts of that kind, we have a less of a context in which to comprehend what it is that those paragraphs and labels mean. And there's, of course, the tendency for people to want to try to write them in a way that's cute rather than as sort of plainly descriptive as possible, which is a separate challenge.
Brendel, my concern is the author's map.
Mhm.
I mean, I agree that, as I read, I have a sense of the book at the beginning and a much different sense at the end. And unlike the real physical world where a map is hard-edged, the text in a book is subjective, and my read and conclusions about it may be quite different than yours. But my first intent is to listen to what the author's saying, and listening or moving through it without roadmaps or reference to its structure, that I begin to think that one way of summarizing that is, I'd like to understand the author's prioritized ideas. What are his main ideas? What are the secondary ideas? And each has details supporting the other. So I want to be able to distinguish details from the main ideas. It seems to me that publishing editors don't really understand why Microsoft's PowerPoint was so successful in computer presentations, even though it's somewhat outdated now. It gets the big points very clear, and it doesn't worry about the details. I wish books would help me do the same thing.
Well, it's very interesting. I don't know if I'm coming. Am I coming through?
Yes.
It's very interesting you say that, because something I observed, I did as a comment to a ministry here in the UK, and one of the things that amazed me was the sheer paucity of tools they had. In the case of the place I went to, it was the Google suite rather than a Microsoft Office suite, but it's the same trifecta of a word processor, a presentation app, and a spreadsheet. And when I was a youngster in the public service, as a young naval officer, we used to have, they were little about A5 memo pads. I mean, A5, small, sort of like the size of the front of a book. Probably a bit smaller than that. And it had two boxes. It was from, to, and then the subject. And you couldn't put much on it. It was designed for memos. And what I realized when I looked at the just blizzard of PowerPoint presentations is actually that's what people used it for, because they had no memo pads. They would write in a presentation software, because writing in a word lookalike application was not fit for the purpose when they just wanted to write a few bullet points. I think that was partly necessity, but I think there's an interesting observation there, which I think speaks to the point you were making about the fact that you just want to capture the overview part.
Well, I've always wanted PowerPoint to be dynamic as well. So when you wanted to understand something further, you could click on the detail that's not in the PowerPoint presentation. So it's similar to the things we've been talking about.
Well, you can. The problem is that most of our sort of office workers are functionally illiterate when it comes to hypertext. I mean, they can click web links, but that's not what I mean by it. I was very surprised that very few people would even use in-document links. Not just use them, didn't even know that the possibility existed. So most of the things, the Google Suite and the Microsoft Office Suite, you can do that. Do people do it? No, because I think partly because a lot of people think that's not my job. I can't be bothered. It takes quite an organized person, probably the sort who tend to turn up here, who do keep vast troves of information and relish the ability to find stuff. Who may think that, but that's not where I think the general population is, which is an important observation, because if we build tools for them that are too complicated or full of affordances that they still won't use, even if we show them how to use them, because it's just so against their understanding of what the tool is for. there's perhaps a lesson there as well.
So, Mark, if this is encodable by the authoring software, could you explain briefly to Jim how Visual Meta will allow that to be accessible to the reader? Because that's one of the things I'm not sure he's aware of, and my voice is crackly.
Yeah, understood. So one of the ideas of Visual Meta was to have something that basically could survive even through print. Just
Jim, do you know what it is?
Yes, I think, although I need to kind of get experience with it first
Oh, okay.
before I comment.
Fine.
But
then
it's
we'll have
extensible.
time on that. Okay, thank you.
I'll give a very quick overview. I mean, in a sense, we'll say you're familiar with what it is. So the two main things it's done at this point that we've explored to some degree is, one is effectively producing a bibliography in a form that, you know, basically is structured, so you can go and sort of dereference yourself. The other thing has been to capture headings within the documents. And glossary items. So what Freud's alluding to is that effectively there are various strands of metadata, and it's broadly up to the authoring tool as to how much is put in there. But so the fact that the author's sort of map might be lost doesn't have to be the case. If we presume for the moment, if we allow ourselves to concede that the author has a sense of a map, let's start from that premise. If they do, then a tool that supports their ability to capture that could also then persist that map, not just sort of in a sense shown within the document, but could persist it through the metadata that's in Visual Meta, which means that another tool might be able to reconstruct it and use it in a different way, or to reconstruct the, you know, in a sense, the original map. And I think, again, this is quite important because it helps to reinforce the notion that for some writing, not all, I mean, I don't think you really need it for the average airport novel. You might for Game of Thrones, perhaps, but not the average airport novel. But for, you know, a lot of academic writing or business writing like that, you might want this rich structure around it. And indeed, the sort of the long form article might be the least useful part of this artifact you're creating, which again is something I don't think as authors in the current time that we're quite ready to embrace. I think that's quite a challenging concept to a lot of people who are at the point where, no, I was told you make an outline, you write the outline, you know, soup to nuts, print, done. Whereas that might, for instance, just give the broad strokes of it, but the really valued thing, for instance, going back to your point about the author's map, might be some metadata. Now, whether it's manifested in the reading tool or whether it's something that you just get as a glob of metadata that you can go and do with yourself, or it might be both, or it might be seeded graphically some way into the long form narrative. I mean, they're all possibilities. None of this is fixed. But what is interesting to me in that is to even be able to do that, you have some that this is their authorial work for works that need it. As I say, not if I'm just trying to write a novel for entertainment, but if I'm writing something structured, and I'm trying to put across maybe a complex subject, or I'm, you know, pitching something for a company or for a ministry or something, you know, something big like that, then this structure may be far more important than the mere words that sit in the sort of surface document.
This highlights the need for a deeper literacy. So Apple has pro apps, Final Cut, Logic, but not for text. So I've decided that my personal long-term goal is to have Tim Cook in 5 years or less at a Macworld saying, and now for the latest pro app, Author, which Apple has then bought, including me. And it includes all these amazing AI plugins, which anyone can use.
We like the Macworld.
What's that? Oh, this crap line.
I mean, I take your point, Frodo, but we didn't catch anything after Macworld. but I absolutely agree, and you know, that's something that I'm not angling toward myself. Is what is it that writing is? How can we take it to a better direction? I was speaking to the person who was responsible. My new manager is actually that previously was the manager of mail for a number of years, and so I was talking to her about, do we have anything that helps people write good emails? And she said, there are some external plugins. We implemented a plugin architecture, but I thought that was funny, that it doesn't like, for all of the emphasis on communication within the context of something like mail, that it itself doesn't see itself as properly positioned, adequately positioned to be able to make a pronouncement on what makes an effective email. Despite the fact that Apple in many places runs quite substantially on emails, and there are classes on how definitely not to write an email to an executive and things. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy updating the end user, and I think that's where people like us need to be less snobby to things like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, because yes, of course, TikTok has many problems. The literacy of the average user there is phenomenally high. The way they can splice videos, do duets, do effects, do all this stuff, and also understand the social landscape. They're way more literate than most people who just write text documents. And we need to find a way to make people who write text feel like they want to get to the same level of tool literacy.
Yeah, I mean, I see that as manifestly possible. I was talking to, was it my air conditioning guy? Somebody came to fix my air conditioning, and he was sort of bemoaning the sort of lack of relevant skills in the modern populace. And so I sort of pointed him to the concept of the Flynn Effect. Jim Flynn from the University of Otago, where I went to school, discovered the sort of IQ inflation over the 20th century. That no matter which tests, no matter basically which body of people, if you were to administer sort of a turn of the 19th century IQ test to somebody at the turn of the 20th, then they would typically report about a quartile higher. I think simply because the kinds of things that we were testing for in IQ at the turn of the 20th were things that we all had to get better at using in the turn of by the turn of the 21st. And so it, you know, the good news is it will happen. The bad news is that it's probably us to help. And so that doesn't let us off the hook. It's just that we will succeed.
There are, of course, evolutionary pressures that tools put upon us. You know, the whole thing of first we build the building and then the building shapes us type of thing. McLuhan and Churchill and whoever. There are things we can do. And the only point I kind of disagreed with Doug Engelbart was his sole focus on capability. Capability, of course, it's most important. But if it doesn't become actually achievable to integrate into a human being's repertoire of capabilities, then it just stays theoretical. So that's why it's so important with what we're doing to prototype and test and all of that good stuff. I'm just uploading another image here since there's a bit of quiet. I want to know what you feel about this image, please. It's supposed to be the first image for author in the App Store. Make sense, or should I change something?
I'm not getting any image. I'm just getting your picture.
No, it's in the chat,
Chat.
James. You need to click and it'll download to your downloads folder.
Okay.
-serious.png.
It makes sense to me, Fred, but I the problem is I don't know if it necessarily makes sense to the person who doesn't know the problem is people don't know really what they might have that they need.
Yeah,
And that's really
exactly.
hard to put across.
Exactly.
So it's not a fault of your, I mean, it says that no matter how well you write this, part of the problem is that the very people who might need some of the things you're doing
The logic of what's
won't
written,
get it from a short written.
the logic is basically to start with serious and then end with distraction free. The middle stuff is just the highlights of what I mean by serious. So I'm hoping to target someone who is serious about their writing. That might capture them. Oh, this is not a, anyway, any thoughts would be, yeah, appreciated.
Well, I'll give one other, and that's just I do wonder when I see someone. I think for a lot of people, when you talk about writing, they think you're writing a book, not you're writing your company manifesto, or in other words, or some academic work. So the sort of writing that actually you're targeting isn't probably what a lot of people think about as writing. I mean, it is.
No, number one target is university students, but I don't want to necessarily write that because then I may lose a lot of other people, but maybe I should write that.
No, I understand that, but what I mean is just I wonder if that's what they think. They use Word because they have to, but that's what they do for handing in assignments. If they want to write a book, they'll probably go and use Scrivener or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So if I were to delve into marketing, as I know that you've done a bit of it as well, Frode, I would say start with the user benefit. So it's not what it is, it's what it does for them or what they can do with it. So if what it is that it'll improve their writing, then talk about that rather than what it is, because people don't buy a drill, they buy a hole. So if you have pronouncements that you can confidently make, that you're comfortable about making about what it does to your writing or your understanding of your own writing, then lead with that rather than what the product is, despite the fact that it's supposed to be an advertisement for the product.
I completely agree.
That makes sense.
I completely agree with your logic. But if we look at, for instance, Photoshop, if Photoshop was to come out today and people didn't know, it doesn't really boil down to it make photos prettier or something like that. It is, I think it's a bigger thing because it's the things you can do, but what do you get out of it? You get out of it a better image, but you also get out of it that you're a different person. You're someone who can manipulate images, you're a photographer. So that's why the word serious, a lot of these writing tools are quite whimsical or general. I'm very happy to change it, but that's the rationale behind it.
Yeah, I would still assert that it's possible to do both. Talk about it being serious, or talk about the way in which it can alter serious writing, or be a tool that alters your writing in a way that is for the better. Because powerful views, to me, maybe living in America for too long, doesn't necessarily have the meaning that it might if it was more explicitly clarified in terms of what it is that those views are, or what they do, or the fact that they exist. To me, it's a phrase that
In the next slides on the App Store, that is shown and explained. And I do get quite a few click-throughs on this, but I don't get as many downloads as I'd like. So that's a strong point. Peter.
I think problem is the students don't have any sense of what affordances you're talking about or what kinds of capabilities a writing or hypertext system can have. All they know, WYSIWYG word processors, and their mind's sort of locked into that mentality. So it's very difficult. It's like trying to explain someone author or to try to explain hypertext to them because they never use an application that has that kind of a deep open-ended capability to it. They're used to everything being shoot into, there's an app for that. So if I want to write a recipe, what I've got to do is I've got to look for the recipe writing app. And if I want to write a to-do list, I've got to find the to-do list app. And everything's just a narrow one tool per task. Whereas what we have are open-ended affordances that can be layered in different ways. That notion of the combinatory explosion of a small number of richly interacting core capabilities is absolutely absent from the model of how modern applications are designed and structured. So unless someone had a background using LaTeX in academic writing or working with Tinderbox or using Author or one of the handful of broad, deep tools like that, it's very difficult to try to explain. Deep views, the word views won't have any meaning whatsoever. The concept of a view is something that we know because we have computer science backgrounds, but someone who isn't familiar with the model view controller paradigm from CS is going to get a complete blank view. They're going to think of as just like a picture or maybe just a visualization. If they even think of that, more likely it'll just draw a blank. So we have a really difficult educational task there of getting them out of that mentality of someone has to have already built a little chute that I can walk through to arrive at my target destination.
I mean, reading is written on screen. I'll admit that I sort of, in a sense, I didn't misread, but I misparsed featuring powerful views as if the person that built this has powerful views from which I, well, may or may not benefit. But the main thing is they have powerful views, which is not what you're talking about at all, which I think exemplifies the point that Brando was making, which is not a critique on what you've written, but the problem is it's how you sell the solution, because they don't know they need a serious writing tool. They don't even know what serious writing is.
Exactly.
I'm not sure I do. I'm honest. Again, and I don't mean that unkindly. I'm trying to acknowledge how, you
I'm
know,
not taking it,
in any given context, we're all dumb.
Yeah.
No, it's sort of like we're exposing them to completely alien technology. They've never seen a system designed by Doug or Ted, and exposure to it, there's no common frame of reference. So trying to verbalize what they're going to experience, it doesn't work out of the box.
Yeah. You know. I mean, where does this fit in the Marvel universe?
Yeah, I think it called back. I mean, I'm not sure how you feel about it, but I think it called back to the growing popularity of the term tools for thought, saying that it's a tool for thoughtful writing. Could be a way of characterizing that for those who understand it.
I wish the tools for thought was a bigger community, because when I try to kind of find things for it, it seems to be really small. I've updated it, by the way, based on what you guys just said.
But I don't think I like Brandel's idea a lot, and I don't think one by using that term is speaking to a particular audience. It's more that I think I get that more than I get what serious writing is. Okay, so I'm going to write stuff that I've actually been thinking about, and actually, hopefully, at least some of the students are thinking about what they're writing. So there's an easier call to action.
It's not a tool for thought primarily, though. It is a tool for writing.
No, and that's right, and that's why I say a tool for thoughtful writing. It's like tool for thought, but it is primarily for writing. So I think that's an interesting distinction.
I would agree.
And contains the seed of that callback.
I kind of love that. Let me just write it down. Do I have to put a little thing in the corner saying marketing by Apple, since you came up with that? That was nervous laughter.
That's right. You know.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't work in marketing anymore. Yeah, I just finished my third day in the new organization
Right.
last Friday, and I'm now an hour into my workday for my fourth.
Mm.
That's very exciting. I think I will head into the office to sort of drink it all in after this.
It was so funny how you earlier talked about when I worked in marketing in Apple, like it's years ago.
Mm. Well, I haven't really worked on the marketing content for Apple for 2 years.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping.
Yeah, there's one other interesting thread of research that might be worth tugging at, and that's work on trial notebooks and automated trial notebooks for the legal community. I put in a WorldCat link to the key dissertation in that area by Stuart Allen Sutton. You'll find that back in the chat scroll way up. But the general notion there is trying to link subject matter outlines to bodies of evidence and exposition related thereto, to ensure that at the end you form a logically consistent proof effectively of the proposition you're starting out with. And there were a couple of systems that came up over the years that were working in that general direction. Hasn't been much reported on it, primarily because people in law don't have the programming background to be able to implement the ideas. So you'll occasionally see an article or just an informal conversation somewhere online, someone saying, gee, I wish I had an automated trial notebook that could do this, that, and the other thing, but the people talking about that generally lack the capability to implement it. So what we have seen commercially are some all-in-one office suite tools targeted to law firms. And the general pattern there is I like a photo of a virtual background from some lawyer's office, looking out at a major city, like you have like a Boston cityscape will be the background of your desktop, looking out the window. And then it'll be like a little miniature email client, put in a crude calendar, a rough outliner, and there won't really be any logical or substantive writing functionality in there. But the idea is it'll be one app that you can open. It'll be your office for basic interaction, and I'll have like a template for writing an engagement letter to a client, and another template for writing the billing letter to the client. So it'll be basically a couple of little legal forms that are bundled in with a little text editor, and it looks cute. Those products were hot for a while during the 90s, but they're sort of falling by the wayside to cloud-based offerings from big firms that are doing the functionality without the cutesy virtual backdrop, pretend we're an office app kind of environment. So they're trying to move into subscription model cloud-based services, but the notion of a standalone user-centered on his own desktop legal notebook kind of a tool capability is a sweet spot that no one's really pursuing, again, because the people with the subject matter expertise don't have the development expertise, and they're certainly not aware of the work in our community. The best work was Stuart Allen Sutton's dissertation, and again, you can find that back in the chataways. Good, Mark just reposted it. And unfortunately, when he did that work in the early 90s, we didn't have all of the open source software tools. And I actually asked him in a few meetings, why don't you implement this now? And he really had no interest in getting into the software development headspace. He was more in the library science headspace. So he didn't pick it up and run with it. And the dissertation itself, I don't think it's available online anywhere. So it's very hard to track down. There are a few physical copies and a couple of law libraries out there, and that's about it. So the work was largely forgotten.
That's a big topic. So, but just a question, the last one. So Brundle is commenting on the image, okay. Brenda, I think I may use that tagline for author, is that okay?
Yeah, no, as I said it, I was like, this is really good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
you should go back to your old job.
Yeah, that looks good. I'll give that last
Well,
copy.
you know,
a thumbs up.
Win friends, get dates, and write better.
Even my wife's, I asked
No.
her, just checking stuff and say, is that better? Just simply, yes. Yeah.
That's what we want to hear, folks.
That's C-suite. That's C-suite approval for you.
Yeah. It's just single email with a single thumbs up emoji.
Yeah.
That's all we need sometimes. All right, thanks, guys. A lot to talk about. It's really
Yeah,
funny.
this has been.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of the practicalities of life, we have two versions of author because testing an in-app purchase of author was so tough that it turned out for months we were just having in-app purchase on, as it was free for people. So that's why we have to have two versions, you know, and I think that's why it's important for us to prototype for the other stuff. There are so many unknown, darn annoying things we need to get through, you know.
I think part of the difficult sale at the moment is the number of people who really get some of this stuff is so low that they're not enough to create the groundswell to tell all the other people that where the general audience is at the moment.
Well, see you all on Friday then.
I lost a bit there, but thanks very much for today and look forward to Friday. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh.
Take care.
Oh, and actually, I'm going to be at the dentist on Friday, so I'm going to have to miss it. I'll catch the recording.
Okay, see you in a week. Bye.
Bye-bye.